Our reading for this week comes from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 13, verses 10 to 17. Now Jesus was in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath, and just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and was quite unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called over to her and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." When he laid his hands on her, immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, and do not come on the Sabbath day." But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrites! Does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away to give it water? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 long years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day?" When he said this, all his opponents were put to shame, and the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things that he was doing. Last weekend, I climbed Cinnamon Mountain, which is between West Yellowstone and Big Sky, up to an old fire lookout. It was a moderate climb, nothing too steep like Livingston Peak, but it also wasn't a Sunday afternoon stroll in the park. And when I reached the top of the mountain, I thought it was just me and my dog Livy up there, but I quickly realized that there were also birds singing their mid-morning songs. The grasshoppers were present, jumping about, making all sorts of strange noises with their wings. And then a chipmunk dashed out on the branch of a nearby pine tree, seemingly taunting Livy and letting us know that they weren't too happy that we were invading their territory. I sat down on a rock and looked out, and it made sense to me why they put a fire lookup out there. The views were expansive, looking out over what appeared to be a never-ending expanse of mountains. The trees dotting the foothills, the tan rock exposed, dominating many of the upper parts of the mountains, and the peaks of the mountains were jagged and irregular. The sun was warm on my skin with a gentle breeze to cool me off from the heat of climbing and to keep the bugs away. And I watched big fluffy clouds scroll across the sky, slowly morphing as they moved. And I couldn't decide what was most beautiful, the deep, deep blue sky, or the clouds parading across the sky, or the mountains that so splendidly had pushed their way up through the earth, or the thousands and thousands of pine trees growing below, creating the perfect habitat for creatures. I could have stayed up on that mountain forever, watching it all, hearing it all, experiencing it all, and taking it all in. The climb and sitting atop that mountain were Sabbath for me. It was a Sabbath in the sense that Jesus makes clear in this passage. It was a time of healing, a place where I more deeply connected to God, and I was reminded of God's presence and provision. In that time on the mountain, I let go of worry and preoccupation and the need to be productive. I felt as free as the birds soaring through the sky, because in that moment, I was so deeply aware of God's love for me as God's daughter. The religious leaders in today's gospel reading had a pretty narrow view of what the Sabbath was. And it was a perspective that left them stuck in an interpretation that blinded them. Their interpretation blinded them to the need for healing for a woman who stood right in front of them. And it was a perspective that kept them from fully seeing, much less experiencing God's presence and work right in front of them. Jesus expanded the meaning and practice of Sabbath. The moment he spoke those words of healing and his hand brought healing to that woman, Jesus showed us that the Sabbath is, at least in part, about healing and being set free. Sabbath is about connecting with God. Whatever it is that brings healing and life, this is what Sabbath is. Jesus had been teaching in the synagogue and stopped what he was doing in order to heal this woman. Jesus' action demonstrated that he was present to bring healing now to whomever needed it. Jesus was about bringing new life to all people here and now. And boy, do we need healing and new life. I think we're all more than aware of the ways that this community, this congregation, and we as individuals need healing. There's much that has been lost, and there's much that will never be the same as it once was. I think about the community of Livingston. It will never be what it was before the railroad left. Livingston will never be the community it was when you could walk down the street downtown and know everybody. Livingston will never be the same place it was before so many people started moving here from other states. Livingston will never be the place it was before the flood a couple of months ago. These things that once were beautiful things, and I know that you are grieving their loss. And I also know that you are healing. American Lutheran will never be the same congregation where 300 kids once went to Sunday school each Sunday morning. And this congregation will never be the same as it was when former pastors were here. And it will never be the same congregation as when we had more than enough food, enough people to cook and serve all the lutefisk dinner to the congregation members and to the whole community. And we'll never be the same congregation we were before the COVID pandemic. These things that once were beautiful things, and I know that you are grieving them. And I also know that you are healing. And I know that as individuals, there are many things that you will never be the same about. You'll never be the same as you were before you had children, or before a child died, or before your children moved away. And you'll never be the same as you were before you lost that job, or before you retired. You'll never be the same you were before your parent, or your sibling, or your spouse died. You'll never be the same as you were before that health event that changed your life significantly. These things that once were beautiful things, and I know that you are grieving their loss. And I also know that you are healing. Just like Jesus' presence healed that woman who had been burdened for 18 years, Jesus' presence among us continues to heal us. And so I invite you to imagine something with me for a few moments, and maybe close your eyes if you feel comfortable doing so. Imagine yourself as that woman standing bent over from all the pain and burden that you carry, the physical and emotional, the spiritual and the social burden. And I invite you to bring to mind a burden that is most holding you back from feeling whole or healed or well or fully alive. For far too long, it feels like you haven't had the strength or the courage to stand up straight because of the weight of that burden that you carry. And you're aware of the burden, of course, but you're helpless to do anything about it. You've tried yourself to ignore it or get rid of that burden, but it remains. And maybe you even found the courage to ask someone else for help, but that burden still hangs heavy on you. And since you are bent over, you don't notice Jesus approaching you at first. And then perhaps you see his shadow. Or maybe you sense his presence as he approaches you. And when he gets close enough to you, he bends down himself to meet you. And when your eyes meet Jesus's, you hear Jesus's calm and steady voice, filled with the compassion that you so desperately need. Jesus gently places his hand on you and says, "You are set free." And in an instant, the weight of the world is lifted off your shoulders. You have forgotten what it was like not to have this burden. And now it feels both disorienting and astounding to be set free. You didn't ask or approach Jesus for him to heal you. He came to you. He bent down to see you. And he sees you for all of who you are. He sees your pain and your burden, and he sets you free from it all. And so here we are, weary but resilient, exhausted but hopeful. And Jesus has restored our dignity. Our hope has been renewed. Our full being has been recognized. And we have been released from our shame and forgiven from our offenses. And the healing may feel slow or even non-existent, and perhaps, or most definitely, not in the way that we had hoped for. But we are healing. We are set free from the bondage of guilt. We're set free from the bondage of what was. We're set free from the fear of what could be, and we're set free to be present here and now. And perhaps most powerfully, we're set free to discover God and how God is working around us here and now. Jesus is bringing new life here in this place. And I see it in the faces of the congregation members of this church. I see it in the presence, and I see it in your words. I see that new life, and I see that healing from all that has been lost. And I trust that Jesus will continue to heal us all. So let us rejoice, for God is working here and now to bring healing to all of us who need so much healing. Thanks be to God. Amen.